This is a podcast with Stuart Seymour from Virgin Media and Chris Henry from Compendium Solutions. Welcome to our show, Leaders with Suspicions. I hope you enjoy.
Stuart, welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
So, could you just give us a bit of background about your role and where you work?
Yeah. My name is Stuart Seymour, and I have the privilege to lead Virgin Media's security, both cybersecurity, physical security investigations, and its resilience.
So, looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've got quite a track record in this space and leadership and industry presence. So, could you just tell me a bit about your journey?
Yeah, no, of course. So my leadership journey started in the British Army. So I was very blessed to have gone to Sandhurst and then joined the Queen's Dragoon Guards. And I guess, in terms of leadership, my foundations were very much built not only at Sandhurst, but also, throughout my time in the army. And servant leadership is, something that I hold very dear, something that I espouse, and, something that was taught to you on your first day as you arrived at Sandhurst. One of the many things you were given, but one that I still have is a little booklet, which is called Serve to Lead, or cap badge. That was the motto on it, Serve to Lead. And that was, impressed upon you every day, and that, leadership is a privilege, and that you are there to serve, the people that you've been lucky enough to have been put in charge of. So that's the British Army. I was then a risk consultant for about 5 years. I then spent time at Lockheed Martin. I was there for around 4 years. Centrica, who are the owners of British Gas, British American Tobacco, and now here at Virgin Media O2.
So, as you've gone through your career, it seems that you become more and more cyber central in terms of what you do. Was that a conscious decision, or did you just float that way?
No. It was actually very conscious. At Centrica, I was the person who was sort of accountable and responsible for crisis management. And I remember in and around, 2016, when the first, major attack happened, looking at Centrica's response to it. So it was, at the time of NotPetya and WannaCry, the sort of the 2016, 2017 era. And then very quickly realizing that this was the new frontier and that this was where the new kind of corporate risk was. And then as I read up more about it, I became fascinated by it. I was lucky enough that my CEO at the time in Centrica heavily invested in me. The first thing that I sort of did is he put this development program for me, and then I went to Las Vegas, learned how to hack, came back, and then ran sort of cyber defense, and then my career progressed after that in the cyber area. So no, it was a very, very deliberate decision and an appreciation of where the landscape was shifting to.
So I presume you've met lots of interesting people in the army and then later on in your cyber career. Who were some of the key influencers and mentors, and what did you learn from them?
Met lots of, really, really interesting people throughout my career. If I think of a couple of really influential people, I'd have to think, well, General Sir Maurice Johnson, because he was the person that I interviewed for and that accepted me into the Queen's Dragoon Guards. And I remember as I went into the Queen's Dragoon Guards as a young officer, I got a handwritten letter from him with, a couple of words of encouragement and what have you. So General Sir Maurice was really influential for me. And then fast forward to, being a young troop leader, my commanding officer at the time, who subsequently became General Sir Simon Mayle, I think he was incredibly influential because there are a couple of times like all young officers, I sort of misstepped, and he was very good at the time in, showing me the right way. But it wasn't just the kind of the what, it was the how, and how I, rather than feel completely crushed and that I'd let everyone down in this particular exercise, it was a sort of a reaffirmation and sort of a motivation to then get sort of moving again. When during the conflict in Sierra Leone, I was very blessed to work under Peter Babington, Royal Marines, who was incredibly influential for me in just a very seasoned officer who'd been there and done it, but was incredibly calm and graceful under pressure. There was nothing that could that remotely disturbed him, made him, destabilized him. And bearing in mind that, we were in the UN at the time, and there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of different perspectives brought on by, different people. And it is not only the events on the ground were very stressful, but the political dimension was very stressful, and he was just completely unflappable and had just the most amazing sense of perspective and an incredibly dark humor, but would alleviate a tense situation with just, a phrase or an anecdote. So just incredibly remarkable. And so in my army, there are many others, but those would be the sort of the three that I'd kind of pick out. And then as my cyber career, progressed, Ian Conn, who was the CEO at Centrica at the time, who took an intelligent risk on me. And that's something that I've always tried to do, and I feel do with my team now, is take intelligent risks. At Virgin Media O2, I'm incredibly proud that around 61% of all of our internal promotions and, 61% of all of our promotions is internal movement. It's all about growth and development of people and taking intelligent risks. So Ian Conn was sort of hugely influential in that regard. At Centrica, at Lockheed Martin, Gary Damone, who was my boss there, was hugely influential and was very good at setting a direction and then just getting out of your way, but supporting you in the background and knowing that you had the air cover. So yeah, those are the people that have been sort of critical for me, and taking different bits from the army, from Centrica, from Lockheed Martin, and at BAT really doubling down on the sort of the philosophy that the how is as important as the what. And again, taking that through to Virgin Media O2, it's to do with, there's no real point in allowing someone to, complete a project ahead of time and ahead of budget if they leave, 20 dead bodies behind them and nobody wants to work with them again. And nobody wants to use that application or tool or whatever they've deployed, simply because of the sort of the scarring that it's left behind. So yeah, I think those are and of course there's the problem with a question like this, is that you're always going to forget someone, and you're always going to forget someone that was really important to your career and your development. And I don't mean to, lots of people are very, very important to me, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of each and what each kind of taught me.
I think well said there at the end. Someone said to me the other day that leadership is a language, and I also think it's a set of behaviors, standards as well. And I think from what you've said, you've articulated various good role models that have helped you become who you are today. Moving a bit on as cyber, so I've been a CTO, IT director, and all the different names we've had for it for a number of years, and I was chief digital officer of student loans, so I was quite aware in sort of 10 years ago about the standards in government cyber and what needs to be done. But it seems to me that the cyber threat landscape is getting more and more relentless. And there's a bunch of ever-present things you should do: vulnerability scanning, patching, keeping things up to date, testing for social engineering, and all the rest of it. But it'd be really interesting for you to sort of say what you think's changing, what you think's becoming new.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is relentless, and to sort of the term relentless, I would also add continually evolving. So, and fast paced. So what worked for you, a year ago or 6 months ago might not work for you now. And the threat is so dynamic and so fast moving that aspect in itself takes quite a lot of agility to be able to deal with. And interestingly, companies aren't set up in an agile way because, quite rightly so, there's all the governance and procedures that you have to comply, that you have to go through. And I'm absolutely on board with all of those and support them absolutely. But adversaries don't have governance boards, and adversaries don't need to go into pre-prod, test, user acceptance, testing again, etc. That we quite, on most occasions quite rightly demand. And so the adversary is more fleet of foot and can change tack really, really quickly, whereas we aren't. But if you say, so what else is changing about the threat, Chris? There's AI, which is now on everybody's lips, which in essence is lowering barriers to entry for the adversary and for the criminal. You've always had nation states, and there's always been, I think cyber's always been a good avenue for nation states to pursue because of its lack of definition. So, for example, I launch a missile from the English Channel and I hit a hospital and I kill 24 people, then that's very clearly an act of war. And there's very clear international law. Target a hospital's OT system, shut a couple of things down and kill the same amount of people. Well, it's not an act of war and it's not as clearly defined, and it's happening all the time. And it's happening all the time with, nation states that affiliate themselves with criminal organizations. So there's that massive gray area, or just criminal organizations outright who will target these critical infrastructures that could lead to the loss of life. And, where are you now? I quite rightly can't launch a missile from my home, a kinetic one, but I can launch a cyber one. And I quite rightly can't procure what I require to make a bomb, but I can do so in the cyber world. And I can use AI, and I can, write a piece of malicious software, and I can embed it into a file that is very attractive to you because, I can talk about cricket or football or whatever that I've seen from your Facebook, and I know it's free tickets to Arsenal, and, click and away you go. So that bit in relation to the threat, plus its dynamism, plus its continual evolution, throw in a bit of AI and you're right, it's a complex environment.
And do you think the tooling's evolved sufficiently to support? I mean, there's the standard log consolidation, patching, and vulnerability bits of software that have been around for years and evolved. But I do wonder more about the social engineering threat.
Yeah, and so I would argue that it's evolved on both counts. So in the social engineering one is really interesting because I've spoken to in conferences or to peers where they talk about the human being the weakest link in the chain, and that a significant number of attacks are successful because of human error. I clicked on this link, or I entered my credentials here, or I allowed I'm in a call center and I allowed escalation of privileges, etc., etc. And rather than the human being being the weakest link, I view them at Virgin Media O2 as our most vulnerable asset. Because again, it's the human being that reports when something isn't quite right. The human being reports when, there's been this attempt, and is able to give you this piece of adversarial intelligence. So, and to go in a rather long-winded way, but back to the core of your question, I've seen that the human being as a defense mechanism, not necessarily as a tool, but as a defense mechanism, that's evolved for the better. I remember earlier in my career trying to communicate in a corporation about the importance of security and the importance of clean desks. And I wouldn't get the airtime. I wouldn't get the ability. I'd be told by the communications team at the time that, we're too busy, or we're too flooded, or, it's not in the messaging calendar, or it doesn't fit our messaging rhythm. Whereas now there's a lot more awareness, both in employees and, one of the things that's brilliant about Virgin Media O2 is we've kind of, whereas before in other companies I've worked for, there was a very strict control over what was communicated inside the enterprise. Virgin Media O2's democratized that. And we have our own sort of work equivalent of Facebook, where anybody can ask anything and post anything and say anything and what have you. And therefore you can, set up specific communities where you can communicate these things. So the human being, not as a tool, but as a defense mechanism, I think has got a lot better. The ability to communicate and their awareness has got a lot better. Now, so I've taken your question and I've kind of perverted it a bit, but to go to your original question, which is, our tools, keeping pace, predominantly yes, but there's also a saturation in the market, right? And there's also, and that sort of saturation sort of leads to a bit of CISO fatigue, that, you now had the 12th vendor that's told you that they and only they have the golden bullet that is the answer to all ills. Tools I've seen, have evolved. If you look at, antivirus and how that initially started, and how that was all based on signatures, and then how that developed into, by heuristics, and then how that developed into EDR, and then how that developed into XDR, and how then you have machine learning and all the sort of things on top. Then, just looking at keeping viruses away from my laptop, if that's the mission, you can see how antivirus has developed into XDR. And therefore, yes, I think tools are progressing and getting better. And I think, security software companies or security provision companies need to, because, the minute you find a hole in product X, then product X is really no longer viable.
So what does a day in the life of Stuart look like?
Well, it always starts very early in the morning with me walking my dog before I go to work, before I get on the train. And I really value that time, because that's where I do a lot of my thinking, and that's where I allow myself to, that's where I've been at my most creative when it comes to, strategy, or thinking about my team, or new initiatives to help grow and develop my team. They always come from a sort of a early morning dog walk. Then it's to the office, and then every day there is no singular, the days start the same and then never follow a pattern. I could be, looking at, the growth and development of my team, how I can take them to the next level, how my succession plans, are they coming to fruition? I can then be looking at some operational aspect. I could be looking at, security. I could be answering business questions in relation to security. I could be looking at regulatory impacts. I could be collaborating with peers. I could be speaking at a conference. I could be seeing, the government and the National Cybersecurity Center all. And, if there's an event or an incident somewhere along the line, well, then the day doesn't end as it normally does. So, yeah, I think it's important to be able to carve out some time outside work to be able to just clear your head, for your mental well-being. But also I tend to find that that's when I always go with a little pad and paper, and that's when I'm at my most sort of creative.
Yeah, one of the things I often ask people in operational roles is how do they maintain control over their environment? I think when you're in an operational context, you've got 31 million customers, a team of over 170, and it's a complicated org. There's a lot of things that can throw at you, and you can quite easily end up being run by the organization rather than running your patch. How do you maintain that control?
I think I've been very blessed insofar as the army has given me a wonderful sense of perspective. and going on operational tours and seeing and experiencing some things has given me this ability to be able to, I think, see quite clearly and be able to be calm, because it's highly unlikely that it's going to be life and death what I'm dealing with now. So I think perspective is key, and I think perspective is critical. And I also think that the further on in my career I've got, it's sort of an understanding that not every email needs to be answered and not every battle needs to be fought, and looking at and being super clear on your purpose and your mission, and just being able to weed out what is not, if it's not part of the purpose of my team, which is to look after Virgin Media O2's customers and their safety and well-being, and the company's assets, brands, and reputation. If it's not within that North Star, then it's quite easy to deprioritize.
I guess many CISO type leaders in an organization, they worry about their employees or their actual organization. You've got an additional responsibility of the consumers as well of your services. Yeah. Could you just unpack a little bit the complexity that brings? I mean, you get mobile phone scams and people getting tricked. I mean, there's a whole range of dangers for consumers.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is, and there's quite a lot of dimensions to those dangers, and you start thinking about people that might be vulnerable, or people that might be more susceptible to scam because of their circumstances. But it's not just the sort of the fraudulent aspect of it. There's the whole part that if you think about it, my primary purpose is to allow you to seamlessly communicate with whoever you, Chris, want to communicate with, whether it's one of your loved ones who's in hospital or coming out of hospital, or whether it's my son who's just doing his, touch wood, final A level, whether what happened during COVID, where we were able to bring sort of families together, and it's keeping that infrastructure safe, secure, and alive. And so that's the sort of the customer bit that for me is also incredibly relevant, over and above what you just mentioned about the frauds and the scams and the thefts and the like. But there's also my colleagues and at Virgin Media O2 are also my customers, because I need to keep them safe and the company safe and its infrastructure safe. So yeah, there's sort of more nuance to it, and I need to ensure that there is the required availability, because at the end of the day, the ability to communicate via mobile phone or email or what have you is critical for today's society.
Okay. And I guess there's people who don't understand the difficulty of coordination and cooperation within the telco industry. There's people who own bits of infrastructure, and there's people that own numbers, and there's people who own routing, and then we've got VoIP service, which means that people from outside the UK can pretend to be in the UK. It's a massively complicated industry. Can you just explain a little bit for the listeners about who's responsible for what and how that gets coordinated, and is it coordinated?
I mean, I think that's worthy of a podcast all on its own. What is critical is that not just at the operational side, but also in the security side. We can't be isolated. We can't be on our own. There's an African proverb that again is one of the things that I learned from one of my bosses at BAT, which said, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I think that there has to be that that principle within, and yeah, certainly within the security element, we do talk, we do collaborate, we do cooperate at many different levels, whether it's sharing intelligence in terms of organized crime targeting stores to threat actors and the like. And just like we do that in security, we do that in terms of the network teams, in terms of the operations teams, in terms of, industry teams where, the government might propose a piece of legislation. We all come in as a forum and see what's best for UK PLC.
Okay. Bring it back home a little bit more. So what are your key goals and challenges for the next 12 months for you and your team?
Yeah, for the next 12 months for the team, first of all, it's all about my team. So my primary focus is their growth and development. So they all have personal development plans. They all have courses that they go on, and we do secondments and cross-team activities. So it's continuing that and continuing to see, the marvelous growth and progression that's already happened over the past 2 and a bit years. So I always start with people. I think that, in IT, it tends to be technology, and then a very distant second, it's process, and then a very distant last, it's people. And I've very firmly, put that on its head. So it's people. And even with the advent of AI, you still need people to teach a model, to build a model, build the automation, to check that the 90% of what the AI is telling you is correct and it hasn't, taken something data set from somewhere that wasn't correct. So people is very much on my horizon. In 2012, my people internally, my customers are very much on my horizon in 2012, and it's killing the spam messages that they get. It's enabling, our reaction times, should we need to support them in any way. So customers and quite a number of initiatives in the next 12 months are very, very firmly on my mind. And then in terms of Virgin Media O2, the sort of the corporation in itself, it's, continuing to work alongside my peers in the sort of the external network and internal IT to reduce the attack surface and reduce the security risk and make Virgin Media O2 prohibitively expensive for the attack.
That's a good way to summarize it. Yeah, in terms of prohibitively expensive, it is often about being a lower attraction target, isn't it, than others? So, but you talked about quite a few things there in terms of goals. Are you able to put KPIs around those? I mean, you talk of as a very people focused.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that with KPIs?
Yeah, no. So we have KPIs about in relation to people. We have number of personal development plans completed and signed off, and that was my very first mandate when I arrived 2 and a bit years ago, and the bar there is 100%. We have, in terms of people, number of internal promotions that we've had. I believe I told you, it's 61% of that, which I'm incredibly proud of. It's number of courses completed, number of exams passed. So there's a whole range of KPIs that I look at when it comes to people. Then in terms of other aspects, it's looking at things like our security controls framework and how are we, tracking both in levels of maturity, but also in levels of the red, amber, green status of that. Plus, you then add a layer of maturity on top of what you've been doing it. So our aim is to ensure that all of these controls, where appropriate, are automated and repeatable. So there's a KPI in relation to that. There's KPIs in terms of mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to recover. There's KPIs in terms of finance and money spent, tracking to and also value delivered from certain initiatives. What we've done is we've been able to articulate security risk in pounds and pence, and therefore we're now able to track how that informs our security strategy, and then in turn able to track what we've been able to buy, which in turn is able to track how that investment decision has reduced the risk, not only qualitatively but quantitatively.
That's quite a fascinating approach. So when you use scoring risk, you know, normal impacts and severity, you put pound notes on that as well.
As well.
Have you, on what basis do you benchmark or do that? Because it's quite easy to be dramatic in business cases, isn't it?
No. And so what we do is we use a tool, an external tool that has a huge number of data points that come into it, that we then input our data into this tool. It looks at external threats, it looks at real life cases, it looks at external breaches, it looks at either fines that the company might have received or money spent in addressing the breach, puts all that data together, and then gives us an output. And I like that because it's independent and it's not us finger in the air, or it's not, oh gosh, what's the cost of a cyber breach? Oh well, it's 187 million pounds. And well, how did you come up with that figure? Well, that's what British Airways got fined, but we're not British Airways. The same circumstances that led to that will never be replicated again. That was a one-off, and it completely removes all of that, and has a sort of, this vendor has a sort of a data lake of data points that you input it into the tool, and it comes out with a figure. And for me, the figure, the more data you put into it, the more it can be refined, the more accurate the figure is. But what it also gives me, as we're going through phase 3, the third iteration of this, is it doesn't, what matters to me is that it gives me a baseline, and then I can see whether that baseline is improving or getting worse, and I can then also use that baseline to look at deltas and then say, well, if we were to invest X into this, then I'd reduce that delta by Y, and therefore that investment investment decision is a sound one on behalf of the company. And the more you work with it, the more accurate it is.
I think that's quite interesting to use that in your business cases. I think one thing leaders learn the hard way sometimes is others' perception of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come and ask for money or a decision, people perceive you as somebody who doesn't ask for things often, therefore it must be really needed because you've asked for it. Or you're the kind of person that's always asking for everything that you've seen on the latest CIO magazine, in which case you have a different reputation. Was that a conscious thing to create this?
It was absolutely a conscious thing. And I think you're very right. I very deliberately don't ask, and I very deliberately don't speak, because when I do ask or I do speak, it is acknowledged as being, a serious request. There is, I think this, as security professionals, we do ourselves an incredible disservice, because the MO always used to be either do this or you'll go to jail, or do this or you'll get fined, and then you come up with a arbitrary figure in 87 million quid or whatever it might be, and it was all through fear, and that's how the sort of it was done. Whereas I think I've more consciously focused on building kind of confidence, building cyber confidence, and so that when I do go to my executive committee and say there is a problem, I'm more likely to be taken seriously. And forgive me if you can hear the dog, he's just saying he agrees.
The dog will forever be recorded in this.
Yeah, he's just violently agreeing with everything I'm saying,
as a good dog should. So I think that's a very important in terms of the putting numbers in the business cases, because reputation really matters, I think, as a leader in a business. Just changing tack a little bit in terms of innovation is often a thing that I ask leaders about. And there's a double challenge, I guess. A large organization and also a very risk mindset part of that organization. How do you encourage innovation? How do you find that works with your people in those big company and risk?
Yeah, no, really well, because one of the cultural shifts that we've made, certainly within security, is that I very actively encourage people to take intelligent risks. And in allowing them to do that, there then is an aspect of psychological safety that then allows them to innovate. So, and then I reward both success and failure. And I think that whole concept of failure is a really interesting one. So again, if you think about how my career has developed, one of the things that I learned at Lockheed Martin is, in order to, at the end of the year in your appraisal, get outstanding contributor, which was, the A grade, you had to formally demonstrate a couple of criteria. One of them was not afraid to fail. And when I first joined Lockheed, I thought, this is very odd. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with failure. And I think that was a bit of my naivety and immaturity. And then a couple of years later, I went to visit Google in Sunnyvale. So Lockheed Martin and Google were kind of neighbors in Sunnyvale, California. And they were telling me about their whole culture of failure. And they called it, I think, if memory serves me, moonshots, which they actively encourage their employees to, try and fail. And they were saying that is how, some of the amazing products that, Google has developed came about. It's by trial, error, and not being afraid of that error bit, and that you're going to get shot because you did that error bit, and you spent all this time and all this money and it didn't work, sort of. And then that got me thinking about, and I wrote a paper on it, but I don't think I ever published it, on this thing that I called at the time, Wile E. Coyote syndrome, which is, I don't know if you remember the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote and what have you. And Wile E. Coyote would come up with these amazing schemes, but there would be one bit in the 4-bit plan that would fail, and he'd miss the Roadrunner, and he'd abandon the whole scheme and then try another one. Whereas if he'd, got a smaller rock that wasn't quite as heavy, then the cliff edge wouldn't have collapsed. Then he would have got the Roadrunner. And if he just spent time learning from those mistakes, as opposed to throwing it all out the window and then going from the rock, rolling the rock over the canyon concept to now big rocket turned into fireworks with a car bolted onto it concept, then I'm sure, it would have been a very short cartoon series, right? Wouldn't have run for 30 years. That would have missed the whole premise. But I think we kind of have Wile E. Coyote syndrome in the corporate world, where we're too afraid of failure and we're not willing to kind of examine it, own it, improve it, admit it, and then move forward.
Yeah, that's again, it would be another podcast, but somebody used a phrase to me over the weekend called the chain of blame. Seems more important than just learning about which bits could be changed. Well, that's a new one for me. Roadrunner in what Coyote in yeah.
Wile E. Coyote syndrome.
Yeah.
TM, you heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. So at this point, I normally say, well, what advice would you give people, earlier on in either their army career or CISO career, other than watching cartoons? Yeah, please.
Yeah. What advice would I give? Learn, continue to learn, never stop. Never stop learning, because that's how you stay alive. Always take time out for yourself to reflect on what went well and what went badly. Develop a culture where you're a servant leader and you're at the service of others, as opposed to at the service of yourself. Have perspective. It probably isn't terminal, whatever you're going through in a corporate sense. Learn from your mistakes and promote an environment of psychological safety where people can feel safe to fail, so that turns into the sort of fertile ground for innovation. Don't take yourself too seriously. You're not the smartest man in the room. And if you think you are, you're in the wrong. Hire people brighter than you. And don't forget, take a pinch of salt and don't forget to enjoy it.
Thank you, Stuart. A really interesting podcast.
My pleasure, Chris.